Hello everyone, Neil Tappin and Joel Tadman here from Golf Monthly, and welcome to West Hill Golf Club and this video in which we're going to take a look at when you should think about upgrading your irons.
Yeah, a set of irons is one of the biggest purchases you'll make as a golfer in your equipment, so it pays to do it at the right time. And we're going to highlight some of the factors that you might need to think about in terms of making that big investment at the right time, which should reap some big performance gains.
Yeah, now before we start, please do hit the pause button, leave some comments below. What irons are you using? Now I know from experience there's going to be some people watching these videos who are using some irons from quite a long time ago. We'd love to hear what you have to say about them. Why do you love them? Why have they stayed in the bag for so long? We'd be really interested to hear your thoughts. But let's start now. Let's take a look at our first category, which is whether your handicap is going up or coming down.
Okay, so the first area we're going to be looking at is whether your handicap is going up or down. It can have an impact on the timing of buying new irons and also the type of irons you buy. Neil, what sort of things do golfers need to think about here?
Well, I'm going to focus firstly on whether your handicap is coming down. And if it is, you need to think why it's coming down. It might well be that your ball striking has become much more consistent. And if it has, you need to now consider, how do you keep that improvement going? Now, you might well conclude that the biggest difference to your game going forward would come less from an iron set that was offering more consistency of strike and more from an iron set that was offering more consistency over your ball flight. So it might be that the improvement in your game could come from the ability to shape shots a little bit better or the ability to control your ball flight a little bit more. And if you fall into that category, then certainly a more sort of shallow cavity style set of irons could make a big difference to your game.
Now conversely, if your handicap's going up and you feel like it's your ball striking, your iron play that's to blame, maybe in the past you've gone for an iron set that's geared more towards feel and workability, but now your ball striking isn't quite as good. You're utilising more of the club face on your iron shots. You need something that's a bit more user-friendly, a bit more stable on those off-centre hits. You want to be thinking about upgrading to something that's a little bit more confidence-inspiring, a little bit larger, maybe longer from heel to toe, wider sole, thicker top line, those sorts of things, just to make hitting those iron shots a little bit easier. But one thing I would add to this, Neil, is that don't just assume your iron play is to blame for your handicap going up. So try and keep some stats if you can, whether it's the shot tracking systems that are available or just after your round, note down how many greens you hit, see how that compares to the average of your handicap, because it could be that your handicap's going up, but actually it's your driving or your short game that's to blame, and actually your iron play is pretty good, and therefore you just need to stick with what you got.
Yeah, so as Joel said, I think at the heart of all of this is making an honest evaluation about where you are with your iron game. If you think that better, more consistent ball strikes are going to make a difference, or if you feel like more control of your iron play is going to make a difference, then yes, perhaps upgrading your irons is the right thing to do. So when it comes to feel, this is a far less quantifiable aspect of the buying decision, but with your irons in particular, this is really important. So Joel, when you look at the iron market in 2020, what are the differences? What will people notice if they're using something from 2020 versus something from a few years ago?
Yeah, actually I'd say the sound and the feel is arguably one of the areas where these irons have improved the most, actually, in terms of performance gains. Game improvement irons, mid-handicap irons, definitely sound and feel an awful lot better than they did 5-10 years ago. So if your set is a few years old, I think if you tried something new, you'd be actually blown away by how good they feel and also how often you will experience that out on the golf course, because that feel, you don't see those big drop-offs in feel on those off-centre hits. It's much more consistent. You don't get those really harsh sounding shots from the heel and toe. So you're going to get a better feel more often from a modern day set.
Yeah, it's a good point. The only other thing I would add, Joel, is that there's a new trend towards hollow-headed irons that are geared up towards distance, and those irons also feel great. So the manufacturers have worked hard to make sure that even though the head is hollow, you don't get that really kind of high-pitched sort of tinny impact sound.
Or a clicky sound sometimes.
Yeah, that no one particularly wants to impact. You still want that sort of buttery, smooth feeling to impact. The manufacturer's done a great job with that. So if you are someone that's thinking about going for a set more geared up towards distance, then it's good to know that the feel the manufacturers have worked in is much better in 2020.
Right, so next up we're talking about swing changes. I'm sure there's a lot of golfers out there having lessons to try and improve their iron play, but as they change their technique, maybe those clubs that they're using at the moment aren't matched up to what they're working on in their swing, and that can have a detriment to their performance, or maybe they're not improving as quickly as they'd like to. So Neil, what are the things that golfers need to think about when changing their swing and then the irons they use?
Yeah, well, it might well be that you've got a set of irons that's geared up to help you combat your fade or your slice. Let's say you've chosen a set of irons with quite a bit of offset. you make swing changes, suddenly those irons are causing you to hit pulls consistently, and that's obviously not going to be great for your game. So you might need to tweak your irons in line with your swing changes on that regard. And then a few of the other things to think about, quite obviously, are you getting faster? Is your swing speed increasing? If so, the shafts of your irons might not be quite right for you. And then also things like your angle of attack. It might well be that your pro's getting you sort of slightly steeper into the ball, which means that you really, in order to get the best ball striking performance that you can, you need a slightly different set of irons. It's all part of the sort of the landscape of what you need to think about if you are going through swing changes.
Yeah, some good points there, Neil. And even if you're not having swing changes at the moment, I would always recommend having a spec check on your irons to make sure they're built exactly how they should be. Over time, your lie angles can change, maybe even your lofts can change. So it's always worth going to see a pro, getting your lie angles checked to make sure they're fully optimized for your current swing.
So being a good iron player is less about how far you hit the ball and more about how consistent you are. Having said that, the manufacturers have made some big strides in offering more distance in their iron sets. Joel, what are the things that people need to look out for here?
Yeah, I don't think golfers are naive to the fact that manufacturers are strengthening the lofts of their irons. So if your irons are a few years old, a modern day iron set will hit the ball further, they're going to give you more speed. The spin will also be a little bit lower, but we found from our testing actually ball flights have remained pretty similar. So while they're stronger in loft, they've still got no problem getting the ball up in the air, and the descent angles remain similarly steep, so they should be playable for a range of handicaps. And while I always think that iron play is more about distance consistency than out and out distance, there will be some golfers out there who maybe are hitting their irons shorter than they were a few years ago and actually would benefit from more distance, and therefore an upgrade to a modern day set would really help them out.
Now, one thing I would say, Joel, is that I tested a set of Mizuno T-Zoid irons from circa 1996 up against a set of Mizuno JPX 919 forged irons from 2018, and I hit the newer version 13 yards further through the air. Now, obviously, that newer 7-iron will be stronger in loft than the older 7-iron, but the ball flight was exactly the same. They were still getting up into the air nicely and offering plenty of stopping power. So how many people out there are going to sort of turn away from that extra 13 yards of distance? I know that if I was faced with quite a long shot into a green, I'd rather hit a 7-iron than a 6-iron.
Yeah, very true, Neil. Although one thing I would add to that is that the number on the bottom of the iron doesn't mean an awful lot these days. We're seeing a big range in lofts of 7-irons from 26 degrees all the way up to 34 degrees. So if you are comparing a 7-iron to another 7-iron, that's just definitely something to bear in mind. And also, if you are upgrading to a new set of irons where you're getting a lot of extra distance, just be wary that can create some gapping issues at either end of the bag. You might need to think about adding an extra wedge or things like that. So while extra distance with your irons sounds great and it will help a lot of golfers out there, can create some issues. So just something to be wary of. Right, so lastly, we're talking about the looks of irons. Neil, at what point do golfers need to think about changing their irons in terms of how a switch and the looks of a club can make a big difference to the performance?
Yeah, I think it's all based on whether you feel confident at address. I think for a lot of people out there, they'll be using sets of irons that they just don't feel comfortable with. They're looking down at the ball at address and they just don't think they're going to make a very good contact. And really, that can lead to the sort of poor swings that can really cost you out on the golf course. You need a set of irons that you feel really confident using. Now, one thing we have seen in the iron market recently is an improvement in terms of the looks of the game improvement irons. So they're getting more compact, they're getting a little bit more sleek. Just, for me, a little bit better to look down on. However, having said that, some golfers will prefer that more confidence-inspiring look where you get a slightly thicker top line, more head down behind the ball to look down on. And I think that's why some of the manufacturers have seen that and they've decided to introduce quite large-headed irons into their range, sort of maximum forgiveness iron ranges. Joel, you've hit quite a few of these, haven't you?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of golfers are more confident looking down on a hybrid than they are a long iron. So we've seen manufacturers extend that into a full set, and there's a few really good options out there. For me, they don't work for me because I just feel like I'm going to duff it because the soles are so wide. But for a lot of golfers, they'll feel like they're going to get the ball up in the air a lot more easily, and obviously they're a lot more forgiving. So it's definitely an option worth considering if you're a high handicapper. And also just think about that combination of top line, offset, what works for your eye. Think about game improvement irons. Sometimes you can see with the wide soles, you see the back of the sole behind the top line, and that can put you off. So if you're thinking about upgrading and trying different irons, try and look at the long irons to see what they look like and whether they're going to suit your eye.
That's a good point, Joel. So if you are thinking about going for a fitting, try and have a look at the set as a whole. Because I think there'll be some people out there that maybe don't like the way the long irons look because there's too much of the back of the sole behind the ball at address. And conversely, it might be that you feel like the shorter irons are too chunky for you, in which case a blended set with something that's a little bit more compact, a little bit slimmer down behind the ball would look better. So plenty to think about in terms of looks. The key here is when you're upgrading and thinking about upgrading, it's all based on how confident you are about the look of your irons down behind the ball. So I think when Joel and I thought about doing this video, we were hoping that by the end of the video, we'd come to the point where we would say something like, you need to think about upgrading your irons every 5 years or something, to give you a real clear idea about the sort of time frames involved. But I think it's actually a little bit more complicated than that, and it's perhaps a little bit less about time and more about what's going on in your own game.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with that, Neil. Although, you know, over time we've seen irons can deteriorate in terms of the durability, the effect of the grooves wearing away can affect performance, but it's definitely more about what's going on in your own game. Are you making swing changes? Is your handicap going up and down? And is your iron play to blame? Those are the sorts of things that have a greater impact on the decision making and whether you need to upgrade your iron.
Yes, I think it's about making an honest assessment of where you are with your iron game. Is it holding you back? And if it isn't, then fine, you know, carry on using what you're using, maybe look at a different area of your equipment to upgrade first. But if it is holding you back, then you need to think about why. And once you've worked out why, then you'll be in a position to make a smarter choice about what irons to go for.
So guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching. Do click the like button if you like what you're watching, and do subscribe to the Golf Monthly YouTube channel so you don't miss any of our equipment videos. But that's all from us from West Hill Golf Club. It's goodbye. We'll see you next time.